It's the supply side of coffee that we need to understand better and get closer to. We were in the coffee industry, not concerned about supply. Coffee was there, but it's not anymore.
This was Raphael Studer, CEO and co-founder of Algrano. Welcome to the Coffee Chronicles, the podcast series in which Deloitte explores the trends, innovations, and personalities of the coffee industry. I'm Daniel Laude, and today I talk to Raphael Studer, CEO and co-founder of Algrano. Most roasters in the market buy their green coffee from intermediaries, and therefore don't come into contact with the farmers who grow their coffee. Algrano offers an alternative. They have developed a digital platform that connects roasters and growers, enabling them to build direct and long-term relationships. Thanks to this business model, Raphael is well connected in the industry and stays up to date with the latest developments. In this episode, he explains how coffee has recently shifted from a buyer's to a seller's market, why he considers price volatility a greater challenge than the high coffee price itself, and how roasters can manage these issues effectively. Enjoy our conversation. Raphael, thank you for coming to our offices, to our recording studio today at Deloitte in Zurich and taking the time to talk to me today. And welcome to the Coffee Chronicles.
Thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to the next hour and talking to you. I hope we'll have an animated discussion.
We will, because since the coffee market is so animated, so dynamic, that's the way our discussion should be, right? But let's start with a personal question. We just poured ourselves a cup here of coffee. Is there something that you had lately that really blew your mind in terms of taste, the experience, the coffee you had lately?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have to think twice about that. I mean, we get some of the best coffees of the world in our office, but it's not about the quality anymore that I'm getting excited about the coffee. It's really about its story. And I think that's something that is still completely underestimated by most coffee drinkers. And one story that I would like to share is I was very fortunate to travel last year with my family through Costa Rica. And we met a young producer in Costa Rica. And they visited us this year in Switzerland. And we were able to place his coffee in one of the biggest retail chains in Switzerland. And I already know now that when I will enter this retail chain, I will see his face on the package and I will know where this coffee is coming from, how our kids played together. This just gives a totally new dimension to this coffee. And I'm really looking forward to tasting it very soon. Yeah.
It's with many other products that we have in the consumer goods industry that you have the product itself, and then you have the story behind it, right?
Absolutely.
That is so, that gives the whole background is almost as important as the product itself. And today we look at the story of the wider market, of the wider coffee community, the coffee scene. And off the mic, you shared, when we talk about where's the coffee market in 2025, off the mic, you shared this analogy that I found very interesting, that the situation in coffee in 2025 is similar to the energy transition. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so 10, 12 years ago, I was working as an energy trader after my PhD in economics. And we had a very similar situation in Europe, especially more talking concretely in electricity trading. In the past, we had coal energy plants, we had nuclear energy plants, and with the energy transition in the European Union to solar, to wind, the supply of energy became extremely volatile. This was paired with a liberalization of the market, so large buyers were able to start buy from different suppliers and from different energy plants, sometimes even back-to-back directly. And this created a whole new dynamic in the market. And 10 years, 12 years later, I'm in coffee, and the supply of coffee has been extremely stable. Prices have been extremely stable. And in the last 18 months, 24 months, this has changed dramatically. And I see a lot of similarities, how actors behave, how new products are developed. that are very similar to what has happened in the electricity market 15 years ago.
You say one of the developments are very similar. Which is the main component that you find similar between the energy transition and the coffee market? What is the one factor that you would carve out?
Yeah. I mean, price is a really good indicator for different information, right? So it aggregates different market environments, it aggregates demand and supply, of course, and the volatility of the coffee price is the indicator that we really need to look at, and where is this volatility coming from? And the volatility is coming from the supply side. So it is when I would have to carve out what is really driving it and where it's coming from. It's the supply side of coffee that we need to understand better and get closer to. We as consumers, we as people in the industry, it has been very far away for us. We were in the coffee industry, not concerned about supply. Coffee was in Hamburg, in Basel, in the Rheinhafen, in Antwerp. Coffee was there, but it's not anymore.
You say the availability in 2025 is limited, or actually, if we look, I think now at a lot of stocks, there aren't virtually any right now. If I were to buy on the spot market, if I were to say, hey, give me a coffee today or in a few days, what has led to this situation? What is behind this state that we're in 2025?
Yeah, we need to go back a bit in time. It all started in November 2023. It was when the Houthi rebels from Yemen actually started to attack ships in the Red Sea. And this led to a reaction on the insurance policies for cargo, for freight, that basically insurance companies would not insure cargo anymore traveling through the Red Sea. This led to the closure of the Djibouti port for most coffee exports, and we need to know that Djibouti port is the most efficient modern port to export Eastern African coffees. And this is exactly in the time when actually Eastern African coffees should have been exported. So Ethiopia, very important country, actually where coffee was born. So very important country for export and for the coffee industry. So we had a huge backlog of shipments from Ethiopia. And coffee is a seasonal product. So if you don't get that coffee out, there will be some shortage at destination. So people started to look around, where can they shop other coffees? And they found it in Peru. Peru is also a country known for its coffee quality, but also for certified coffees. They have a very huge share of fair trade certified, organic certified coffees, which you also find a lot in Ethiopia as well. So it was an excellent origin swap, and Peru actually announced that their harvest was a bit earlier, so shipments could start a bit earlier, and that would replace basically late shipments from Ethiopia. That was the bet in the market. At the same time, prices started to raise a little bit, so Peruvian cooperatives and shippers and exporters were very happy to sell coffee, right? And a lot of people sold a lot of more coffee than they actually had or that they will have. So this led to the second crisis, which was in terms of availability, which was basically that too much coffee was sold and was not harvested. And the reason why it was not harvested was not in volume, it was actually in quality. And that's actually a topic we sometimes forget, but coffee is a product that is cultivated during a year and harvested after a year, and it gets all the negative impact of climate change that you can imagine. So in Peru, for instance, it was too much rain. A few months later, there was too little rain in Brazil. So Brazil, 30% of the world coffee consumption comes out of Brazil. Usually rain arrives between September and November, and rain is needed that the coffee flower or the coffee plant starts flowering, which then will define how many cherries will be on that tree. And the raining season then in September to November was really bad in Brazil in 2024. And this is actually when we see prices skyrocket, because no one had any fantasy anymore where coffee should come from, right? If even Brazil will have a bad harvest next year, we will run out of coffee. So we have on the supply side of coffee various geopolitical impacts, climate impacts that drive the supply down, and that leads to these very, very high prices that we have observed in the last years.
What's common in these factors that you just described, that they can all happen again, right? I mean, climate change or the extreme weather conditions are not getting less. Geopolitical tensions are not getting fewer. So in the end, we can. What's your opinion on that? Is this a permanent situation that we are in, or do you see light at the end of the tunnel as a situation calming down?
No, I see it completely different than, for instance, COVID. During COVID, we had container shortages and late shipments, but the supply was there, right? And it was temporary. And everybody knew in a year from now, the containers will be on time again and we will be fine, right? So that's a temporary situation. But here, it's fundamentally different. It's a structural change that we see that we come from a situation of oversupply that maybe 10 years ago, when coffee was priced at 90 cents the pound of coffee, so maybe, I don't know, $2 the kilogram, right? To now $8, $9 the kilogram, we come into a situation where oversupply is actually changing into undersupply. And this is, on one hand, driven by the factors we just mentioned, but on the other hand, also by steadily increasing demand. And this will not change. The demand will continue to increase. The problems to cultivate coffee will continue to increase. And that's why I strongly believe that this is a structural change that we need to cope with and not react anymore to it, but actually manage it, yes.
There's one figure, or not one figure, but one fact that makes it very tangible for also people outside of the industry. When we look at these shipment times, shipment delays, right now in 2025, if I have the figure right, the delays in the coffee shipments are higher than during COVID. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You need to think of that more than half of the ships don't arrive on time.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So it's really fundamental. And often it's not even the ship that is late. Often it's that the empty container that you need to stuff, that you need to bring the coffee in, is not at the right place at the right moment. So we have a real disruption in where containers are. And the main reason there is, and different reasons, but there are reasons like tariffs and boats go and cargo ships go different directions. There is reasons like Red Sea closure, so that you have to go around Africa, etc. So it takes way longer. And whenever a container takes longer, that container will not be at the right moment at the right place, and this will just continue. You really need to think of it like a domino effect. So it will just continue to cause more delays on other ships, on other routes, exactly.
So two factors that you mentioned were, once the coffee price, which is just the level where the price is, record high prices. I think in February this year, there was a record price of almost $4.40 per pound of green coffee on the spot market. And the other thing is the volatility, so the fluctuation in the price. And I heard you say many times in the past, volatility is for you actually the bigger issue, or not for you, but you see that for roasters, for the whole supply chain in the end, volatility is the bigger issue than the record high coffee price, which is maybe not very intuitive for everybody who listens. But can you explain that? Why do you say that?
Yeah, well, this statement, I really put on the hat as an entrepreneur. No matter on which side of the chain I am, whether I'm a coffee producer or a coffee roaster, what I hate is uncertainty, and volatility is uncertainty in my business. As a roaster and a producer, I cannot budget next year. I cannot. If I buy coffee on the spot, and prices change every month. One time they're 20% higher, 30% lower, 15% higher, 5% lower. No, and I'm talking here changes on a daily basis. So it's really, really crazy how volatile coffee's got. And this makes it really hard for me to price my coffees. So as a producer, but also as a roaster, how how will I tell the restaurant who will buy my coffee or who would like to buy my coffee for the next year, which price will I set? It's impossible. And so I was always smiling when people were saying, oh, we have record high coffee prices, it's a problem. No, record high coffee prices are not the problem. If everyone in the industry pays the same price, my competitor pays the same price, high price as I do, we are competing on other efficiencies, we are competing on marketing, we are competing on our brand, etc. So it's a fair game. And producers, by the way, are paid a fair price, which is also nice, right? So, but if my competitor paid the day before 30% less than I pay today, that's an issue for my business. And so the volatility is really what we should be focused on as roasters and producers, and not the high price per se.
I want to go into the implications of that volatility because I really buy your argument, or I find that very, very interesting. But just to push back on record price versus volatility, one could say that so far fluctuations in price or price increases per se, roasters, retailers, and so forth could compensate via their margins. But now, in the last, as you say, 12, 18, 24 months, we are more and more coming to a condition right now where this is no longer possible. And we've seen the first roasters and retailers already adjusting the prices. We've seen it as consumers in the supermarket or wherever we buy coffee. So is that also a temporary effect? You think prices will adjust and then, or the price of coffee in the supermarket will adjust long term, and then it might go down again and margins are going to just have to adjust? Or do you think this will be a long-term development itself, that we see higher and higher prices in the supermarkets or wherever we buy coffee?
Yeah, if we believe, if you buy my argument that it's a structural problem the coffee industry has, that we have an undersupply of coffee and the rising demand, it will lead to higher prices. It must, right? Otherwise, we will not be able to create the right incentives to increase potentially the cultivation of coffee surfaces in coffee-producing countries. So it needs to be that the price increases. And I strongly believe that also the prices we have seen in the past were not the right prices. So why did we have to start with initiatives like fair trade and pay minimum prices to farmers? Because the regular price was not sufficient, right? So I believe this is a healthy adjustment, and I don't believe that it will go down. And just because looking at the demand and supply equation, we need a price that is higher. And it was interesting to see, because I just want to come back to what you said about the margins. It was interesting to see how long it took roasters to adjust, because I really saw in the market the belief that it's temporary. Yeah, it's temporarily high. I don't want to be the first mover who increases the price. It could drive me out of the market, right? Because my competitor hasn't moved yet, etc. But at some point, it became
You have to.
so high that with every charge of roasting, you're losing money, right?
And longer.
And it became longer in time, exactly. And so then a few bigger players start to move, and then also the smaller ones followed. And I think now and it was necessary, because we also, right, a farmer also needs a healthy roaster. So a financially healthy roaster, they're building a product together. So both of them need to be healthy, in my opinion. And that's, I think it's a good development. And talking to consumers, I would not expect this to go down. No.
Yeah. No, I asked this question because if you're just a consumer and you go into the supermarket, you see the prices rising, you've seen inflation over the last couple of years, again, COVID, other geopolitical tensions, and you don't understand, you don't get the background. So I think it's very important what you laid out in the last minutes or the whole time that we've been talking, because that actually gives you the context of understanding. In the end, roaster and retailers really waited until the last minute. They don't want you to raise prices. It was not some rent seeking or something where they
absolutely not,
to maximize their profits or to increase their profits. It was actually the other way around, that they really waited until the last second. And these price increases are necessary. Otherwise, the problems that we see in the market even get larger and larger and out of hand probably at some point.
I agree. I mean, let me add here something that I find really interesting. When we started our company 10 years ago, we had or when we asked roasters, coffee roasters, what are your biggest problems? They would always say, do we have a market for high-priced coffees? Is the specialty wave that we have seen in the US really coming to Western Europe, or is it just a quick trend, or is it a wave, or etc. So there was a lot of consideration about product market fit. If you ask a roaster today what their biggest problem, and we do this, right? We do this regularly. What their biggest problems are, there is only topics popping up from the supply chain. So it's only supply chain management, availability, reliability in quality, but price volatility, and this is really interesting because what it tells me is something we have been saying for 10 years, but we haven't, not all the years were open, right? During in these last 10 years, now they are. But what we were saying always is roasters had outsourced their supply chain to importers. Importers were the ones controlling the supply chain. And a roaster would buy coffee in Basel, and a roaster would buy coffee in Antwerp, and a roaster would buy coffee in Bremen, but not buy coffee at the farm or at the cooperative. And that's also why they were not aware of potentially the complexity of the supply chain, but also of the opportunities of the supply chain, of individualizing the supply chain. And I think also this is also a chance what we are seeing now, because if you are raising prices, you also need to educate your consumers and customers why you are raising prices. And you can only answer that question. Then there was really good communication, especially in Switzerland. I saw a lot of really good communication from roasters why they had to raise the prices. And it showed that they had genuinely to be interested in understanding their supply chain, in asking questions, in understanding why prices have gone up so much. And I think as much as the consumer actually is educated, also the person one step up in the chain, the coffee roaster, has gone through a tremendous education in the last 2 years to actually really start being interested in managing and controlling their supply chain. Because of course, if there is no coffee available when you're calling your importer, and there's no coffee in Bremen and there's no coffee in Basel, you start thinking about, where do I get my coffee from, and how do I make sure that I have my coffee during the whole year, right? So that's a really interesting change in the industry. I noticed as well.
And what I noticed when you said that the roasters were educating or talking to the customers, to the consumers about the price increases, it was also very interesting to see that some were really transparent about it, or said, okay, now look, this is how much usually coffee or the buying price was part of my P&L or of my balance sheet, so to say. And now the situation is like this, so it has doubled, tripled, whatever. What does that do to my other positions, to my margins? So really showing that there was not much room to maneuver anymore.
Absolutely.
So there's this transparency I found from some. The transparency I found very interesting.
But there were also big retailers informing that if you buy a package of coffee, or if you buy a capsule, or if you drink the coffee in the restaurant, the price increases relatively are actually getting lower and lower and lower, because the importance of green coffee in these different products decreases, right? If you go into a coffee shop and the barista, the location, the rent, etc., is way more meaningful for the price than the green coffee price. So I found this really interesting, and I hope that consumers started to look at it, because in my opinion, it shouldn't be that coffee gets to where it was back in the day, right? It was a luxury product back in the day. I hope it's, and it should stay a mass product, because there's 20 million farmers having a living out of it. There is a huge industry in Switzerland, machine industry, it's huge, right? That that depends on coffee, and I think it has to stay a mass product. But to stay a mass product, we need to make sure that the mass understands what's going on, and we have a long way to go still for that.
So all the topics: availability, lack of availability, lack of reliability, how much coffee is there, record prices, high volatility. How can, let's take a roaster, let's take medium-sized roaster or even big-sized roaster, large-sized roaster, from all the developments or aspects that you've analyzed so far, what are kind of the ways to manage these challenges? What do you recommend to do?
I strongly believe, and this is why we founded this company, that the roaster is not alone with his problems. The producer has exactly the same problems. So the day he harvests the coffee, producer harvests his coffee, where is the coffee price? Is it low? Is it high? He's extremely affected by the volatility. He's extremely affected by not knowing which sales channel it will take, whether it stays internally, quality in the internal market, which has way lower prices, or whether it's good enough quality for export, etc. So there is two partners that are actually, and I really don't like the idea that there is a supplier and a buyer, but it's actually two partners that are creating together a product.
Co-creation, yeah.
It's a co-creation process. And if we think about coffee in that way, and if a roaster and the producer thinks in coffee about that way, and I actually see this a lot in producers. So we always talk a lot about roast because we are consumers, right? We are exposed to roasters, but I see it a lot in on the producer side. They have this understanding and knowledge that if a roaster does well with their coffee, they will be doing well as producer, right? So what as a producer can I do to make my roaster as successful as possible? So given this situation and struggling with the current market environment as a roaster, I believe the only solution is to connect to the supply, and not just to the supplier, but actually create a partnership. And have a plan for your business plan for your product, where you want to go together. How much do you want to grow? Will this coffee be organic one day? Organic certified because you have a different. Will it be decaf? You triggered me today with a decaf coffee, right? Will it be decaf? One that offered as decaf as well. So what is it? What is it that we gonna achieve together? And how does a profit margin for you look like and for me look like? And potentially you get to a point where you will buy coffee way cheaper than what the market is currently asking. But you guarantee together, or you create together, a future of 10 years, a long-term partnership, right? So if you get into these back-to-back transactions that take place next to the exchange, where you create yourself your 5 to 10 key partnerships that help you as a roaster create the best products in the market and you get all the other benefits with it as well. You know, you have traceability, you know how much you paid, you have storytelling. We started with this podcast, and you have storytelling because you know these partners. I know it's more time intensive than calling someone and asking, do you have coffee in Basel? Of course it is. But I believe it's the product you are building, and you should know where it's coming from, and you're only, in my eyes, an outstanding roaster if you get to this point. And personal opinion aside, it will solve your business risks that you currently have. And you mentioned them: availability, reliability, price volatility.
What you're essentially talking about is direct trade, or as you also call it often, this term is kind of diluted in the industry. What is really direct trade is that if I buy from the same producer a few times in a row, but I've never been there, I've never met them, or is it an origin visit that I go to that farm? Apart from that, we do our own things. I think what you've described is really co-creation or close collaboration. Can you give some metrics or some intuition? How does a direct sourcing relationship of coffee, if I have a very close relationship as a roaster with a producer in Brazil or wherever, what does that do to these metrics that we talked about? How high is price volatility, for example, in those relationships compared to the normal market. Do you have an intuition there?
Yeah, I have data from our platform, of course. So we are observing not just the price, but of course also we are measuring the volatility of prices in these long-term relationships. So if we look at a partnership that is over 2 years and we compare it to in the same time to the market price volatility, we see that the contracts on the Algrano platform have half the volatility than the market. So it's huge. It's huge. But it's not just about that. It's just about, even if you have a bit of volatility, you can plan because you know you start. So right now right now at the harvest of Brazil. We're in the harvest time of Brazil. Most of our roasters, they know from whom they will get coffee. They know how much. They know the quality and they know the price. So they were able to budget for the next 12 months the margin they're going to make in the shelf, in the gastronomy, in their own coffee shops, right? And this is what this is about. It's about creating visibility that allows you to, like, I hope every entrepreneur, every company owner, every manager wants to understand, will be able to forecast how the financial statement will look like in 12 months from now. And roasters are, most of the roasters who don't work through such long-term partnerships have not been able to do so in the last 24 months. So I think this is the real advantage it brings. Of course, less volatility, but also you're able to plan and to forecast.
And what does it mean to the availability part of the equation to understand it better? Because I assume I have a direct relationship with a producer in Brazil, but still the harvest has been bad or there's not been enough rain or whatever. How does a direct trade relationship cover for that aspect, or how am I better off in the end?
Yeah, this was really tested last year in Peru. So I mentioned that Peru sold too much coffee. Shippers and exporters and cooperatives sold too much coffee because everybody switched from Ethiopia, right? So who would be served first? Right? That was the big question. Who would get their coffee? And what was it? And we have a lot. So Peru for us is our third biggest country, third biggest origin. So we have a lot of coffee from Peru that transacts through our platform. And we didn't have any substantial shipment changes in shipments. We had maybe bit delays, but the cooperatives would always commit to the volumes and will make sure that the roaster will get the coffee. Maybe they would say, "Hey, can I ship in December instead of September? Can I?" But they would make sure it happens. And the main reason, I believe, is because they got out of anonymity. In the traditional supply chain, I think we need to maybe elaborate on that, right? The producer sells to an intermediary at origin. That intermediary at origin sells to another intermediary that maybe exports. That exporter sells to an importer, and that importer sells to the roaster.
There are up to 7, 8 people sometimes between the producer and I think the end consumer, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And most often the coffee does not change, right? It's basically what it's done. It's shipped from one location to another, and it's a better DHL service because it's a bigger, larger box, right? And it's financed and insured and maybe quality assured, right, during that time. So you get a bit of extra services, but it's no added value, or no value is added. It's not refined. It's not, etc. So I think that's the first thing to understand. What we have done as consumers is we were always puzzled by that supply chain, right? And that's why we have all these traceability initiatives and sustainability initiatives that help us consumers understand where the coffee is coming from. What those initiatives unfortunately missed, and I think it's because they were consumer driven, is telling the producers where their coffee is going to. So they still don't know. Often, 99%, I'm convinced, of the coffee producers' sales, they still don't know where their coffee is going to. So how do you want to have pride for a product? How do you want to have young generations staying in coffee fields and continuing producing if you just turn up on one day and you say, "Here's a price for your coffee, give me a cash." It's a cash crop, right? Here's a price, I give you the cash, you give me the crop. And I think this is one of the big changes that actually this direct trade model, and I have a very simple definition actually for direct trade is, let's ask the farmer whether for them it's direct trade, right? Because if they say, yes, I am directly trading with the roaster, I'm making a price, I'm setting my price myself, I know where it's going to, I think that's for me, it's the best. Then it's clear for me. Right?
If in the end the farmer and the roaster negotiate.
Absolutely. And the farmer knows where it's going to, right?
Yeah.
And I think that creates the pride then also in the product if you understand, my coffee is served in Berlin, is served in London, is served in Zurich. These are my roasters that I'm working with. This is how the packaging looks like at the end of the day. By the way, my name is on the packaging, right? So I think this creates totally new, a new visibility for a brand for the producer on one hand, but also they will do everything to make sure that the coffee gets to the roaster. And I think to answer your question, it took a long time to answer your question, but availability is solved when producer and the roaster both understand this as a long-term partnership. And then both will do their best to make this a success.
We talked a lot about now the advantages for the roaster or for the end of the supply chain, so to say. And what's also, I think, important to stress is the beginning, the ways the producer benefits, because in the traditional coffee market, they often don't have the means or the possibility to invest long-term or think from one year to the next, because they just don't know, will the same one who bought, I mean, they don't even know them, but in theory, will the same people buy my coffee also next year? So what does that mean for me in terms of investing in newer equipment and so forth? And if we have this relationship, I can be sure next year the roaster is going to come again. They're going to buy again. So they are much more likely to invest in the capabilities and the quality of the coffee and so forth. I'm sure you can testify to that.
I would even go a step ahead. So far, they were not aware of what are market trends because they didn't know their final buyers. They didn't know where to invest. We just mentioned, should I invest?
If it were possible, yeah.
Even if it was possible, should I invest into an organic coffee? Is this growing in Europe, right? Should I invest into a new fermentation process because there is demand for that? So having access to your final buyers as a producer creates, on one hand, pride, on one hand, visibility of how much quantity you will be selling at which price in the future, yes, but also you get the first-time market insights of actually what consumers are drinking and where your coffee is used. And this will drive your investment decisions. Yes. I really believe that coffee is, even though it's a huge commodity, it's huge, right? We're talking maybe $70-80 billion market, green coffee that's just exported and imported. So it's huge. But I think it's really, really behind many other industry. So if you look at the bicycle industry, for instance, I love analogies, right? So if you look at the bicycle industry, all these bicycle brands, they produce their bicycle, the frames in Taiwan, right? All of them. There's the same factories there. They use the same producers for frames. But do you think those producers, they will not have a planning call with their buyers? Those producers will call it, how many frames will you produce next year? How does your new frame design look like? When can you share the first designs with you, right? This is a partnership, right? They're producing together a bike. and the same, it's actually crazy if we are thinking that this is not happening in coffee, right?
I just want to close on this positive note because you've shared with us today all the challenges that are in the market, how it has transitioned and how it's still transitioning. So the real shift, the monumental shift that the coffee market is experiencing at the moment and has experienced, but then the optimism to solve these problems and the steps that you laid out show that it's doable and we have a future in the coffee market. So for that, I thank you, Raphael, for the conversation today. I wish you and your business all the best. We will link to you and Algrano in the show notes. And thanks for the talk today.
Thank you very much.